appears you got here just in the nick of time. What does that make us?
Big damn heroes, sir.
Ain't we just?
It's been a while since my last chemtrail ponage video, and since my last series I've received many questions, lots of insults, and some constructive input, and still what amounts to a load of bollocks. What's interested me is the mythological aspect of chemtrails. Like a religion, the adherents blindly cling to anything that seems to support their position, no matter how irrational the leap of logic may be. For example, one viewer pointed me to the supposed shoot-down of a CIA chemtrail aircraft in China that was supposedly spreading weaponized swine flu. This report has turned up over and over again on various conspiracy theory websites as being a factual report. The thing is, it never happened. The report seems to have surfaced on a single pro-environmentalist blog. The site claims sources in the Kremlin. Those sources are never named, nor was the story independently reported anywhere else. A perusal of Chinese and Russian news sites show thousands of anti-CIA stories reported over the time period of the alleged shoot-down, yet not one reports the mysterious chemtrail shoot-down incident. Now, it doesn't take a political scientist to understand that such an incident would in fact be an act of war. The Chinese government would be fully justified in being outraged at an attack on a civilian population by the United States. Yet there's no report in the news. Yet just a few years ago, when a Navy/CIA airplane was forced down following a mid-air collision, the Chinese wasted no time in exploiting the incidents for their political advantage, much to the embarrassment of the United States. So a single unsupported claim in a single blog is taken as an undisputed fact by supposed reputable websites, and the myth gains support. Like all myths, chemtrails have at their core some truth. However, once again, like with a religious tale, the faithful cannot or do not distinguish fantasy from reality. For example, one viewer sent me an article reported in The Guardian about the British government conducting simulated chemical and bioweapons attacks in the 1950s and 1960s in the United Kingdom. Yet there is no evidence that the tests did any harm, nor is there any indication that they are still being conducted. The Cold War scarred the world with a deep paranoia. Certainly it would be a mistake to assume that any government is incapable of performing excessive and even illegal covert operations. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend the documentary Atomic Cafe for a look at some things that really did happen during the Cold War. This is why a free people require a free press who can watchdog the government, not corporate-owned lapdogs. But I digress. The above disclosure of events that happened over half a century ago can certainly be one of the seeds of truth in the myth. Another one that I've mentioned tangentially in my other videos is the ongoing NASA Glory Cares project. This is a classic case of an element of truth being twisted to fit the myth. Glory Cares is a project that uses aircraft and satellites to measure the Earth's atmospheric chemistry in great detail. They are looking for airborne pollutants, specifically sooty carbon compounds from fossil fuels that are carried downwind from large cities. We commonly call these smog. The intent is to understand what impact these chemicals have on the global climate. However, the conspiracy theorists seem to have latched onto the keywords aerosols, aircraft, climate change, and use Glory Cares out of context to support their myth. Another kernel of truth that is being misapplied is a NASA study that examined using artificially enhanced contrails to increase the planet's reflectivity and thus curb global warming. The curious thing about this is that most conspiracy theorists deny global warming is yet another government disinformation conspiracy. Nevertheless, they seem to think that the NASA has progressed from this theoretical paper and is already engaged in such a program right now. The irony is, the NASA paper in question decided that aircraft would be an ineffective method of cooling the planet. Moving on to some specifics about the myth, here are some bullet points that I found to be the most common recurring themes in the variations of the myth. Number 1. Contrails last longer than they used to. Chemtrails can switch on and off while contrails don't. Aircraft use nanotubes to spray so that spraying equipment can't be seen. And number 4, toxic chemicals are being used. Although I've covered most of these items in other videos, let's look at them individually here again. Contrails lasting longer. This particular point does have some validity. The reason, ironically, is that engines have become cleaner and more efficient, especially in the last 20 years, and this seems to produce more contrails. A jet engine burns petroleum fuel. Like all internal combustion engines, the result of this combustion is carbon dioxide and water vapor, plus pollutants such as carbon monoxide and unburned larger hydrocarbon molecules, commonly seen as smog. As jet engines have become more efficient, they burn their fuel more completely. This means that a newer jet engine releases more water vapor and carbon dioxide and fewer pollutants. So ironically, the cleaner engines release more water vapor into the atmosphere, making longer and more persistent contrails. A secondary factor that is still speculative is that climate change is allowing more moisture to filter higher and farther north from the equator. This, combined with the aforementioned engines, may mean that there are more contrails nowadays. Number 2. Chemtrails switch on and off, and contrails don't. This is nonsense. Water vapor in the upper atmosphere can be in pockets, still invisible until the aircraft disturbs the equilibrium, forming a brief contrail. This type of spotty moisture is quite familiar down low. For example, when we see the puffy cumulus clouds, the same process is at work, just one cloud has become visible. One thing you can know when you see spotty contrails, the folks in that plane are getting a rough ride. Aircraft using nanotubes. First, there's no description of what a nanotube might actually be. Are they referring to the very tiny carbon tubes or something larger? If they are the very tiny carbon tubes, one would have to figure out a plausible way for these things to produce a sufficient spray volume at a high altitude without the atmospheric pressure causing them to rupture. Second, without getting into too much of the math, weight is an airplane's worst enemy. There's a law of diminishing returns. The more weight you carry, the more structure you need, which adds weight. The bigger the engine you need, which adds weight. And the more fuel you need, which also adds weight. All of which preclude such a system from being concealed covertly in anything but a dedicated aircraft. Yet, as I've demonstrated, no such fleet exists, nor can it operate unnoticed in the United States. Toxic chemicals are being sprayed. Last I checked, the people most likely to be in charge of this conspiracy live on this planet and breathe the same air as the rest of us. So why would they poison themselves? Even if there was a logical answer, as I've pointed out in previous videos, there's no evidence that anyone, especially aviation professionals most exposed, are becoming ill. This hasn't stopped a cottage industry from springing up, selling chemical-busting gewgaws, in much the same way as garlic merchants used to make money from the vampire tales in the old days. So that brings chemtrails into the light of day as an impractical and factually unsupported myth, being used to generate fear and paranoia for the benefit of those spinning the myth. Whatever you may think the New World Order is or is not up to, this is one thing you can definitely cross off your list.
If I'm your mission shepherd, best give it up. You're welcome on my boat. God ain't.